All right, let's talk about a word that gets thrown around a lot. Postmodernism. If you've ever heard it and thought, what on earth does that actually mean? Well, you are definitely not alone. It's a tricky one. So today, we're going to cut right through all that confusion. We're going straight to the source, to one of the key thinkers himself, the philosopher Jean-François Lyotard, to figure this out. Let's dive in.
So Lyotard doesn't just jump in with some dry academic definition. Instead, he starts with a vibe check, He's looking at the world around him in the late 20th century, and he senses this widespread feeling of exhaustion, a kind of cultural fatigue. He says from every direction, from art critics, from philosophers, even historians, there's this growing pressure to just stop. Stop experimenting. Stop pushing the boundaries and challenging the way things are.
And right away, that observation brings up the big question, the one that really drives his whole argument. Why? Why this sudden urge to put the brakes on experimentation? What's going on here? Why are we all of a sudden retreating from the new?
Okay, so what he lands on is this. He sees this whole mood as a deep-down demand for order. People are craving stability. It's this desire to go back to something called realism, a framework that promises things will be stable and clear in a world that, let's be honest, feels more and more chaotic.
And when you look at what realism demands, you can totally see it all points in the same direction, right? It wants art, and even our thinking, to be simple, direct, easy to get. It's all about having a clear connection to objective reality, one single believable meaning, and, a consensus that we can all just agree on. At its core, it's a huge push for unity and security. It's an attempt to basically wipe out the legacy of the avant-gardes, all that experimental, boundary-pushing stuff.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, Lyotard says that new technologies, things like photography and cinema, just completely change the game. Think about it. These new tools could pump out those comforting, realistic images way better, way faster, and for way more people than a painting or a novel ever could. So this put artists in a really tough spot. They had a choice, either make stuff for the mass market, this kind of conformist art he calls kitsch, or they had to start asking some really fundamental questions about what art is even for.
And this whole thing, this demand for simple, easy realities, it isn't just about what's hanging in a gallery. Lyotard connects it to something way bigger, a huge crisis, really. It's about this growing suspicion we have about the big, grand promises of modernity itself.
I mean, for a couple of centuries, the West was running on this one core belief, that progress was pretty much inevitable. The idea was that, as we got better at science, as art developed, as our politics improved, everything would work together to create this better, freer world for absolutely everyone. That was the big promise, the modern project.
But then, what happens? Lyotard brings up a devastating counterpoint, and he borrows it from another philosopher, Theodor Adorno. He uses just one word, Auschwitz. And that one name is enough to completely shatter that simple, happy story of progress. It forces this really uncomfortable question on us, one you just can't escape. How can we possibly believe in this grand story of humanity getting better and better when our own recent history shows us something so catastrophically awful?
Okay, so let's take stock. The grand project of modernity seems to have failed. Realistic art is now just a tool for making people conform. So, what's left for art to do? What's its new job, its new mission? Well, Lyotard finds his answer in a really cool idea from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. The idea is called the Sublime, and we're not talking about just, pretty things here. The Sublime is that feeling you get, that mix of awe and feeling totally overwhelmed when you're faced with something just immense. Like picture yourself staring up at a perfectly clear, star-filled night sky, and you try to actually grasp the idea of infinity. Your mind can kind of conceive of it, right? But your eyes, your senses, they just can't take it all in. That feeling? That's the sublime. Here's a good way to think about the difference. When you see something beautiful, like a perfectly composed painting, there's this nice, comfortable harmony. The idea and the form, they just fit together perfectly. But with the sublime, the idea is so big, it just breaks the form. It overwhelms it. And that creates this weird conflict inside you. It's a kind of pain almost, the pain of realizing your own limits. But then, that pain turns into a really strange kind of pleasure. The pleasure of knowing that your mind can think of things that are bigger than what you can see or touch. And this is where Lyotard lands on his big claim. He says the real job of modern art isn't to make pretty things anymore. Its job is to be a witness to what he calls the unpresentable. It's about creating art that points toward these huge, sublime ideas, and it does that by showing us the exact moment where our ability to represent them breaks down.
Okay, so now we're talking about this art of the sublime. And right here, Lyotard makes a super important distinction. He draws a line between what he calls modern and what he calls postmodern. And I'm telling you, it is probably not what you think it is.
So get this, both modern and postmodern art are trying to grapple with the unpresentable. They're on the same quest, but they go about it in totally different ways. Modern aesthetics, according to Lyotard, is kind of nostalgic. It's like it misses that sense of wholeness. So it gestures towards the unpresentable, but it does it using forms that are familiar, maybe even a little comforting. Postmodern aesthetics, on the other hand, it's all about experimentation. It's about inventing brand new, even shocking forms to try and give us a much more direct hit of that unpresentable idea. It's often pretty unsettling.
A perfect example from literature is comparing Marcel Proust and James Joyce. Proust writes these long, beautiful, perfectly structured sentences about the unpresentable nature of time and memory. It's elegant. Joyce, though, he just takes a sledgehammer to the rules of language. It shatters grammar and syntax. So when you read Joyce, you're not just reading about the unpresentable, you are experiencing it in the very fabric of the writing itself. That's the postmodern move right there.
Okay, so this brings up a really fascinating question then. If postmodernism is actually a kind of mode within modernism, what on earth does the post part even mean? What's it doing there?
Does it just mean after? Lyotard's answer is a hard no. He says we have to stop thinking about history like a simple straight line, where postmodernism is just the thing that happens after modernism is done and dusted. In fact, thinking like that, he says, is a very modern way to think.
Instead, he wants us to think of post as something closer to the Greek prefix ana. Think of words like analysis or anamnesis. The best way to get your head around it is to think about psychoanalysis. Postmodernism isn't a whole new period in time. It's more like a process. It's the process of working through the modern era, like a culture going to therapy. It's about analyzing modernism, re-examining all its hidden assumptions, and going back to the questions it might have skipped over or forgotten at the very beginning.
And this is what leads him to his most famous and kind of mind-bending conclusion. Postmodernism isn't the thing that comes after modernism ends. It's the thing that's there at its birth. It's modernism in a constant state of becoming. It's that recurring spark of questioning and experimentation that has to happen for any new, truly modern work to even come into existence.
So let's bring it all back to where we started. Remember that initial demand for order and simplicity? Now we can really see why Lyotard thinks it's not just a bad artistic choice, but something genuinely dangerous. Because this isn't just about paintings or novels. This has huge political stakes.
And his warning is incredibly stark. This nostalgia for the whole and the one, this deep desire for a single, unified, easy-to-understand reality, he says that's a dangerous fantasy. Because when you look at history, the attempt to force the incredible complexity of human experience into one neat, tidy box has always come at a terrifying price.
So, the postmodern response isn't just about making weird art. It's an ethical stand, it's a political act. The call to action is to, in his words, wage a war on totality. What does that mean? It means instead of always looking for unity and consensus, our job is to bear witness to the things that don't fit, the things that can't be neatly packaged, the unpresentable. It means we have to champion differences instead of trying to smooth them over or erase them.
And so, Lyotard leaves us with one final thought, a question that he's not asking other philosophers or artists. He's asking us. He's asking you. When we, in our own lives, find ourselves demanding simple answers, clear-cut realities, and nice, comforting stories, what are we really trying to avoid? What complexity are we so afraid of? What uncomfortable truths or inconvenient differences are we trying to shield ourselves from? It's a heavy question to end on, for sure. And maybe, just maybe, wrestling with that question is what being postmodern is all about.